Everyone in Mapleview Courthouse knew Ray, not by name but by the sound of his mop, soft, steady like waves lapping an old dock. The courthouse didn't hum, so much as it breathed gently with age. It was early November, and the Virginia air had turned crisp, curling dry oak leaves along the sidewalk. Like little brown boats, Ray's boots brushed them aside as he crossed the street from Betty's diner, paper cup in hand, steam rising lazily in the morning sun. Betty had greeted him with her usual cream and sugar hon. He'd answered with the usual black as last winter's sky, and left $1 tip just like he always did. She never asked him why he came at the same time every morning, sat at the same booth near the window, or tipped like he owed a debt that couldn't be paid with coins. He paused under the courthouse flagpole, nodding to Bill Thomas, who sat wrapped in a flannel coat on the bench out front, puffing into his cupped hands. "Still walking like a soldier," Ray Bill said with a wry smile. Ray gave the faintest lift of his cup, and the corners of his mouth tugged just enough to be counted. He continued inside. The linoleum squeaked under his step, worn in the corners, still holding to a long faded shine from years of wax. A young intern, all jacket and attitude, darted past him without looking. Ray adjusted his grip on the mop handle and moved toward the stairwell, humming something old and tuneless under his breath. Connor's voice met him at the landing. "You missed a spot by the west railing yesterday," he barked. Ray paused, nodding. "I'll get it this morning." Connor didn't wait for a reply. He was already halfway down the corridor, his radio crackling with static and importance. On the second floor, the air was warmer, thick with brewed coffee, and the faint sugar of someone's leftover donut box. Posters for the Veterans Day ceremony had been taped along the walls. White paper Navy text and a golden star, but no one seemed to notice them. A clerk walked past, eyes on her phone. Another whispered to a colleague, laughing softly, neither glancing at Ray as he wheeled his cart down the hallway. In the break room, 2 secretaries stood near the microwave. "You see that guy, been here for years, never talks, moves like he still thinks he's on duty." They didn't lower their voices, not really. Ray heard, he didn't stop. He moved through the building the way a memory did present but rarely acknowledged. He straightened chairs in courtroom B, adjusted the blinds to let in the soft light, picked up a candy wrapper someone had stuffed between the benches. When he reached the judge's bench, he pulled a cloth from his back pocket and wiped the gavel's resting block until the grain in the wood glowed faintly. No one asked him to, but he did it anyway. At noon, he retreated to the small supply room tucked behind the boiler, where a rusted tin box sat under the shelf. He opened it with careful hands. Inside was a neatly folded navy handkerchief, yellowed at the edges, initials stitched in one corner, and a brass button dulled, but still bearing the eagle of an old officer's coat. He turned the button over in his palm, thumb pressing against the groove. A distant laugh echoed from the hallway. He blinked, refolded the cloth, closed the tin, and stood. Outside the break room, the wall's bulletin board sagged with flyers, takeout menus, and notices. One sheet caught his eye. White, freshly pinned Special Veterans Hearing. November 10th, Ray stared at the paper a beat too long. Ray didn't just clean courtrooms, he restored them like sacred ships before inspection. The courthouse was still shaking off the fog when Ray arrived that morning. It pressed thick against the windows like breath on cold glass, blurring the view of the maple trees out front. Inside, the buzz of fluorescent lights mingled with the soft clinks of spoons stirring coffee and the hiss of overworked radiators. Ray moved through the building with his usual quiet rhythm. Down the hall, posters for the veterans ceremony had multiplied overnight, taped to doors, windows. Even the vending machine, most folks barely glanced at them. He paused beside one, smoothing a curling corner before stepping into courtroom A. The flag behind the bench had hung crooked for weeks. He'd noticed, of course, but today he reached up, adjusted it by 2 inches, and stepped back. It caught a slice of sunlight through the blinds, the stars and stripes lined just so. He gave a small nod to no one in particular and continued wiping down the brass rail that separated the public benches from the attorneys' tables. Voices echoed from the hallway, some familiar, others not. Ray glanced up as a woman rounded the corner, juggling a folder phone and coffee cup. She moved quickly, too quickly, and the folder slipped from her arm. Papers fluttered across the floor like startled birds. Ray was there before anyone else noticed. Kneeling without a word, he gathered the documents carefully, aligning corners with practiced precision. As he handed them up, his eyes caught the plastic badge clipped to her blazer. Daisy Monroe Legal Support. Thanks, she said, a little breathless. That would have been a mess, he nodded once. Happens to the best of us. She hesitated, eyes drifting to the cuff of his shirt, where faded blue thread spelled out USS Raleigh. Her brow lifted, curious. You know that ship? Ray glanced at the stitching, then back to her, different ocean, long time ago, before she could ask more. Connor's voice broke through the moment like a dropped gavel, Ray. You missed the far bench rail. Ray didn't flinch. He stood, tipped his head politely to Daisy, and walked down the hall, footsteps soft against the tile. Later in the break room, a couple of junior clerks leaned near the microwave, whispering, not quite quietly enough, watches the clock like it's military formation. Thinks he's a battleship captain or something. Ray stood by the side table, folding napkins one by one. He didn't look at them, just folded square, corner to corner, slow, exact. When he finished, he placed the stack on the counter, picked up his thermos, and left without a word. That afternoon, he slipped out the side exit and crossed the street to Hardy's Bakery. The bell above the door jingled softly. A young man with a buzz cut and flour on his apron greeted him with a grin. Afternoon, Mr. Ray. Apple spice again. Ray nodded. One slice for later. The boy wrapped it neatly and handed over a paper bag. Ray passed a 10 and waved off the change. You're overpaying again, the boy laughed. Ray tucked the bag under his arm. Old habit, old money. He returned to the courthouse as shadows grew longer. In the janitor's closet, light spilled through the cracked door. He stepped inside, brushed dust from a small shelf, and reached behind a box of polish. A photo slid free. He held it in both hands. The image was yellowed, edges curled. Two men stood on the deck of a ship. Ray, younger by decades, in dress whites. Beside him, a tall officer with a grin that stretched under aviator sunglasses, arms around each other's shoulders. The ocean rolled behind them. Ray stared for a long moment. He flipped it over, written in faded ink, to the one who saved us all. T.M. Ray had cleaned the witness room dozens of times, but today it felt heavier, like memory had dusted every surface. He moved quietly through the room, pushing the door open with the edge of his shoulder. Mop bucket rolling behind him, the air was still but expectant, like a held breath before a hymn. Outside, the courthouse buzzed in ways it rarely did. Voices, footsteps, the occasional flash of a camera, strobe bouncing down the marble corridor. Ray set his cloth on the small table by the witness chair and adjusted its angle by a fraction. Then the other chair. He stepped back, studied them, shifted one again, barely an inch. His hands, though weathered, were steady. At least for now. The calendar near the main office had blinked all morning, reminding every soul in the building, November 10th. Monroe, Varses County Trust. To most, it meant security detail, press badges, too much coffee and not enough sleep. To Ray, it was something else entirely. The wind outside snuck through the lower frame of the windows, sending a draft along the tiled floor. It tugged faintly at the hem of his shirt as he bent to check under the chairs for paper scraps. When he straightened, Daisy Monroe stood in the doorway, folder tucked to her chest. Her lips were tight, eyes scanning the room like it might betray her. Ray stepped aside. Didn't mean to startle, he said. She managed a smile. You didn't... Just Nerves, Ray reached into the side pocket of his coat and pulled out a dented silver thermos. He poured some into the plastic cap and held it out. "It's just tea," she hesitated, then took it, "thanks." She sipped, and her fingers wrapped around the warmth like it steadied more than her hands. After a pause, she said, "My father used to talk about someone. From his Navy days, said a man once talked him through a storm, radio was down, engines gone, said the guy stayed on comms 2 hours straight. Got him home, Ray didn't move, he never mentioned a name, just called him the voice that saw through the dark." Daisy looked up at him. "You ever serve?" Ray folded the thermos back into his coat. Different ocean, long time ago, before she could ask more. Connor pushed through the door with his usual lack of ceremony. "This room's off limits during prep," he barked. "Don't let the janitor crowd the witness." Daisy turned, startled. Ray had already stepped back, his face didn't change. He nodded once to her, then turned toward the mop. Connor scowled. "Let's keep this clean and clear. We've got people coming." Ray didn't speak. He gathered his cloth and moved past them, shoulders square but loose. In the hallway, a boy sat on a bench near the wall, legs swinging above the floor. He watched Ray pass, then leaned toward his mother. "That man's not just a cleaner," he whispered. The woman hushed him gently, patting his knee. Farther down, trumpet notes drifted from a practice room, slightly off-key, but recognizable. "My country, 'tis of thee." The sound bent around the corridor corners, folding over the marble like sunlight through lace. Ray paused near the stairwell, where the air grew cooler. His hand brushed against the wood rail, worn smooth by decades of passing palms. Behind him, footsteps echoed, sharp, steady, deliberate, heavy boots, not rushed but purposeful. Judge March rose from her chair in the prep room, her gaze drawn to the door. Someone in the hallway said, "The Admiral's arrived." When Admiral Monroe walked through the courthouse doors, silence followed like a parade flag, dropping in slow motion. The clocks in the hallway seemed louder that morning, each tick stretching longer than it should. At 11:15 a.m., the light from the front windows cast long stripes across the floor, like the faded shadows of an old uniform. Outside, the breeze lifted the edge of a Veterans Day banner taped near the door. Its corners flapped softly, as if saluting. Ray stood near the far wall, mop angled into a corner, hands resting on the handle. His posture, as always, was straight. The framed photo he had pulled out the night before now sat locked in his closet again. This time turned face down, he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was habit, or fear, or both, through the glass entry. Movement gathered, security shifted. A cluster of reporters leaned forward. Then the doors opened with a heavy creak, and Admiral J.T. Monroe stepped through. Tall, clean-shaven, and moving with purpose, he wore a long navy coat buttoned to the collar. Service pins gleamed across his chest like stars in rank and memory. His gaze scanned the hallway impassive until it landed on Ray. He paused mid-step. Connor, watching from near the courtroom entrance, barked reflexively. "Move. Janitor, VIP coming through." Ray didn't move. Monroe turned his body, fully facing the man with the mop. The hallway went still. He took 3 slow steps forward, stopped then, in a voice that hadn't lost a single note of command. "Permission to speak, boss." The words hit harder than any shout. Murmurs rippled like shockwaves across the walls. A secretary dropped her notepad. A young deputy blinked twice, unsure if he'd misheard. Monroe's shoulders squared, and he brought his hand to his brow in a precise salute, sharp, unwavering. Ray didn't return it. He didn't need to. He gave a faint nod. But his eyes, those eyes clouded by years and silence, held a shimmer that didn't come from the lights. Monroe held the salute for a full breath before letting it fall. He turned toward the crowd. "This man," he said, Voice steady, saved 18 of us during Operation Firewind. No maps, no light, no backup, just a storm and his voice cutting through it. We followed him blind, and we lived, someone gasped. Connor took a step back. Daisy's folder slipped under her arm, but she didn't notice Judge March straightened in her seat, lips parted. The hallway, moments ago humming with quiet urgency, now braced itself against the weight of a truth it had never seen coming. Even the clocks impossibly seemed to tick softer. Ray stood unmoved outside the faint sound of a school choir practicing. Taps drifted through the cracked front door, tentative notes not quite in unison, but full of reverence. A gust stirred the corner of Monroe's coat. Flags rippled along the courthouse lawn, one edge catching the light. Inside, no one spoke. Judge March cleared her throat. "Court is adjourned," she said quietly. As the benches emptied and the crowd shuffled the front steps filled with waiting cameras, Ray remained inside. He did not move toward the door, but through the open frame one microphone swiveled slightly, pointed not at Monroe, not at the courtroom, but at Ray. Ray had always walked the courthouse like a ghost now. Every step left echoes, the buzz started, before the morning's verdict ever cleared the docket. By the time lunch rolled around, someone had already slid a folded copy of the Mapleview Gazette under the break room door in thick block letters across the front page. Janitor turned ghost, Admiral beneath it. A grainy photograph captured the moment Monroe saluted Ray. One man in a mop-stained coat, the other in medals. Inside the courthouse, conversations shifted. Whispers that once skirted past Ray's ears now circled around him like wind around a flagpole. He didn't respond. He simply moved through the halls as he always had, measured, quiet, head slightly bowed, but now footsteps stopped when he passed. Daisy sat in the legal office, her purse in her lap. Untouched for over an hour, she finally reached in and pulled out her father's journal, its worn leather soft at the corners. She flipped to the back. A small square of notepaper, torn unevenly, stuck out between the pages. It read, "He still lives in silence. If you meet him, thank him," her breath caught, across town. Betty's Diner had already made its own kind of tribute. Ray's usual booth by the window bore a fresh white card propped next to the salt shaker, reserved for Mr. Taggart. The bell above the door jingled as Bill, wrapped in his patched coat and carrying a thermos, stepped inside. He saw the sign, smiled, and took the next table over. "About time," he muttered, unfolding a napkin. "That man's been carrying half this town without making a sound." 2 booths away, a teenager scrolled through his phone. "Did you know he once fixed my granddad's truck heater?" "Wouldn't take $1, his mother replied softly. "He held the door open for me every snowy Thursday for 2 years straight." At the courthouse, Judge March knocked gently on the closet door before opening it. Ray stood inside, wiping the handle of his mop as if it still needed shining. She held out a plaque, not large but engraved in clean lettering. "In honor of service beyond duty, Raymond Taggart." He looked at it for a moment, said nothing, and then nodded once. She placed it gently on the shelf. Outside in the hallway, Connor lingered near the vending machine, his arms folded. He spotted Ray passing by and stepped forward awkwardly. "I didn't know." He said, not meeting Ray's eyes. "I mean, if I had," Ray paused. His expression didn't shift. "You still need the far bench rail polished in B?" he asked, quiet and even. Connor blinked. "Yeah. Thanks." That afternoon, Daisy knocked on the supply closet door. When it opened, she didn't speak right away. She simply held out a photograph, worn color faded to soft sepia. Her father, younger and broader, grinned in the frame with Ray beside him. Both of them drenched and proud on a ship deck. It wasn't posed. It was memory, caught in motion. "He talked about you every winter," she said. "Always said, if he ever found you again, he owed you a slice of pie and a handshake." Ray took the photo. His thumb brushed the corner. I remember that storm, so do I, Daisy whispered. Later, the sun dipped behind the courthouse roof, casting long shadows on the steps. Admiral Monroe stood beside Ray, their shoulders squared, watching a teenage janitor sweep methodically across the stone path. "He's got better knees than I did," Ray said, voice dry but amused. Monroe chuckled. "Fewer scars, too, I bet." Ray smiled just a little. From across the square, church bells began to chime, slow, clear, steady. A gust of wind danced through the trees and curled around the building's edge. A voice carried faintly on the breeze, just above a whisper, "See you tomorrow." "Ray, you're leading the ceremony." A year later, Veterans Day in Mapleview started with one extra chair carved from old Navy wood set beside the flagpole. The courthouse lawn was lined with folding chairs in neat rows, each one facing a small platform draped in blue and white bunting. The air was crisp but kind, the kind of early November morning that warmed slowly, like memory. A breeze stirred the flags along the building's facade, and a faint hum from CB radios crackled in the distance, blending with the rustle of programs and shuffling feet. The bench sat just to the right of the flagpole, solid, smoothed at the arms and carved from the reclaimed wood of a retired naval ship deck. On its back, a brass plaque glinted in the light. "He never asked for honor, he just kept the light on." A framed photo rested on the seat, Ray Taggart in his work shirt and cap. A faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth, mop slung over one shoulder like a sailor's rifle. His Navy hat was folded beside it, perfectly creased. "Eddie." The teenage janitor stepped forward with careful hands. He placed Ray's old thermos beside the frame, aligning it precisely as he had been taught. His uniform cap, once Ray's, now fitted to his own smaller frame, sat just a little crooked. He didn't fix it. From the edge of the platform, Admiral Monroe made his way slowly up the steps, one hand gripping a cane, the other clutching a tarnished challenge coin. The microphone squeaked faintly as he leaned toward it. "Some men speak with volume," he said, voice gravelly but sure. Ray Taggart didn't. "But when he moved, we followed. When he stood still, we rested." He paused, glancing toward the bench. "He didn't just keep floors clean, he kept hearts steady. And when the world was a storm, he lit the path." There was no applause, only a long moment of stillness. Daisy stepped forward next, holding a folded letter. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "My father once wrote this," she began. "He led with silence but commanded with heart. He gave orders without words and saved lives without fanfare. I hope my daughter meets someone like him." Her eyes met the crowd. She did. Children from the local school walked in a gentle line, each carrying something handmade. Flags drawn in crayon notes, written in shaky cursive cutouts of stars and hearts, with the words, "Thank you," etched in pencil. One by one, they laid them at the foot of Ray's bench. A small girl stood on tiptoe to place a sunflower next to his photo, then stepped back, lips pursed with reverence. Judge March took the podium last, her hair pinned in place with silver clips. She didn't read from paper. "Service isn't always worn on the chest," she said softly. "Sometimes it's folded in a locker. Sometimes it smells like old polish and pie crust and dust. And sometimes it just walks past you each morning with a nod and a mop." The ceremony ended, not with music, but with stillness. Later that afternoon, inside the courthouse, Eddie pushed the mop down the center of courtroom B. His movements were slow but deliberate. When he reached the flag near the judge's bench, he paused. The top edge had slipped slightly off-center. He stepped forward and adjusted it just 2 inches, and stood back, examining his work. In the break room, the old CB radio, long untouched, long silent, crackled faintly to life. Static gave way to a voice low and dry and edged with a smile. "Ghost Admiral lights still on down here.